obstacles on my path to liberation and all knowingness. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Speech and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. The Dharma and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge into the enlightenment and speech. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. is adorned with my robe is a green mountain, the four continents, and the sun and the moon. As a Buddha field, I offer it. May all sentient beings attain the happiness of the Buddha fields. To the lamas who possess the three kayas, I offer the outer, inner, and secret offerings. With my body, wealth, and all that is visible, please grant me the supreme realization, enlightenment. According to the dispositions and likewise the mental capacities of sentient beings.
다른 것과 이제 다도 끝나 이제 제자한테 어디 봐인가 들 배로를 가면 그 계속을 이게 들 배워서 이제 이거는 그대로 송을 대답을 하고 본인들이 다다다 남편에게 생각도 지나 남편에게 시작하라 그 파탄지에 송랑만 보러 얘기 옛날에 다다 사진마디 대박이 잘하는데 다다다도 뭐 치는 온도로 자녀들 가시나는데 다마까지 잘하는 남들이 디나 치도는 뭐 같이 이거에 이제 이제 그냥 되는 감식이세 뭐 그런데 약보로 강력한 나디 조여에 같이 톱 살이 양대들이 대로지는 다 고민이 들어가는 이래들 따르지 또 각자 고사 내라서 왔던데 제대로 뭐로 된 거를 좀 보면 이거 말이 이들에 다 소소로 사진마디 저자리구나 이상들이 남들께 다다는 양대한테 다 그래야지.
And for those of you who are wondering where we are live streaming, it's through Rinchen Choling Facebook. 大家在问这个要网络直播去哪里找，是在宝法林的脸书上。
And so, Dharma friends, today I'm going to give an introduction to the 4 yogas of Mahamudra. So this term, yoga, first of all, in Tibetan it is Mudra, and that is, it consists of these 2 syllables, Mal and Jor, and Mal is the innate state of the mind itself, and Jor is sort of to unite with that, or to abide within that, or in other words, you recognize the innate nature of your own mind itself. And so then, to realize that, one goes through 4 kind of levels of practice. And however, it's not just those 4 yogas of Naropa, it is also called different names in different traditions. So here it is called the 4 yogas of Naropa, and in the Dzogchen practice, for example, it is called the 4 appearances, and probably we could say that the essence of these 4 levels of those 4 appearances and 4 yogas is actually quite similar. So the words are distinct, but then the meaning is actually essentially the same. We are going basically through different levels of the mind developing wisdom and independence, of freedom. So in the context of the practice of the channels and winds, when we practice the 6 dharmas of Naropa, in that context, the 4 yogas are related to the 4 kinds of bliss, levels of bliss that arise. So there is a sensation of bliss that increasingly arises in the mind. And that actually also corresponds to those 4 yogas. So it's important to understand that it all comes down to one single essential meaning. So in the context of the channels and winds practices, we speak about those 4 levels of bliss or 4 joys. When we practice Mahamudra, in that context, it is referred to as 4 yogas, 4 levels of yogas. In the Dzogchen practice, we speak about 4 appearances. And for example, when we receive an empowerment in a secret mantra, there are 4 empowerments, 4 levels of empowerments. And actually, that is the first time when we are introduced to those 4 levels, is when we receive an empowerment. So it's important to know that all of these sets of 4 are connected to each other. And this we should hold as our basis for our practice. So then from an actual practical perspective, we speak about, from the perspective of meditation practice, we speak about 4 levels of yoga, 4 yogas. And then there's many different methods that we are introduced to when it comes to meditation practice. But then also actually on the level of the fruition, the result, we speak about the 4 kayas. So all of these, the 4 joys and the 4 appearances, the 4 yogas and the empowerment and the 4 kayas, all of them, they are interrelated. This actually was also taught by Rinchen. We need to know how to gather it all into a single essence. And so here we are introduced to mind, the nature of mind, in the context of the 4 yogas of Mahamudra. And regarding the Mahamudra practice in general, there are many different instructions, many books, some longer, some shorter, that you can find and read. And so this particular instruction that we're going to talk about today comes from the, it's called the Dharma Kirti Choling, the oral instructions Dharma Kirti, that also in the context of our retreat, Garchen Rinpoche is teaching that to the retreatants. There are many teachings on that, and actually the words in that text are very concise. They're just a few. So it's good to receive an instruction on that, but then we cannot just leave it at that. You should also find other material, other books. There might have been, maybe there's a translation available of the Fivefold Path of Mahamudra and commentaries on that. So you can try to find those books and read them and study them really well. Because when you learn about this practice, then you also can go into more depth of certain potential dangers or faults that could occur in the practice or deviations and so forth. So for this reason, it's also important to read instructions or books about that. So it's good to receive an instruction, but this teaching alone is not sufficient. It is also important that you inform yourself elsewhere and read books and so forth. So if there is a translation of the Fivefold Path of Mahamudra, then you might also find the 4 yogas in there, or any other books on those 4 yogas. It's just important that you really inform yourself well, again and again.
大家早，今天呢，我们要讲这个大手印是瑜伽。那所谓的瑜伽呢，这个在藏文是 Namjo。那第一个字是讲内在、内心的意思，我们心的这个心性。那第2个字呢，指的是这个结合在一起。那么这个呢是能够帮我们那个证悟的过程之前呢，在透过4个层次的修行。那这个有关大手印的是瑜伽，不只是纳罗巴大师他讲的4个层瑜伽，在这个大圆满的修持方面也有讲说4层的显象。所以这个4层的显象也好，4个瑜伽也好，它们虽然它文字跟名相是不同，但是它们的意义是相似的。这主要指的是我们内心的心事的禅修过程当中不同层次的开发，不同的智慧，以及不同的程度的这个自由。从纳罗巴祖师讲的那个纳罗6法里面讲到气脉的修法。当我们修气脉的时候，我们的大乐渐渐在心中升起。那么，但是它总不管是怎么样的讲法呢，唯有一个中心的这个要义，那就是这个在修气脉的过程当中，会有4个层次的大乐那个一层一层的显现。所以在大手印的讲法呢，我们就讲它为是瑜伽。4层瑜伽，然后大圆满是4部显象。那么我们在修习密乘的过程当中，有的时候我们也会接受到4级灌顶，就像昨天一样。那么这个一般来讲4级灌顶是我们第一次得到这个4个层次的这个概念。那这个4个层次呢，彼此并不是 绝对分离，而是彼此是相关联的。这个是在禅修的过程当中，我们修行的过程当中的不同的阶段，所以在大印里面是把它讲作是瑜伽。那当然，禅修的方法有很多不同的传承，不同的传统有不同的修行的方法。如果从结果的果地来讲的话，是跟我们将来证得的四身是有关系的。所以不管是四身也好，四级灌顶也好，四部瑜伽也好，彼此都是有相关联的。那从过去的基美林巴祖师来讲，他这个是把它最主要，不管这些名相怎么样，它根本有一个同样的根基，同样唯一的一个要义，这个是我们必须要了解的。主要讲的是心性或者是心的本性。那这个在大手印里面有讲的很多的，有很多的教授。那么在坊间呢，也有许许多多不同的论者也好，译者也好，对关于大手印的修辞有许许多多的书，有些或长或短。那今天讲的这个文呢，是由那个 Lama Kirti 他这个 oral instruction， 他这个 Lama Kirti 他的这个口传的这个教授来写下来的。那这个是我们在山上的仁亲洞穴族分仁波切呢，他对于闭关的行者，他也用这个法本来教授。那这个法本是非常的精要的。那么如果说大家有机缘能够得到这个法的教授，是非常的好的。可是我是在这边要呼吁大家，也要提醒大家的，不要只停留在这个地方。大家应该在听完这个之后，再进一步的去找坊间不同的有关大手印五之道的书，来好好的研读。如果说你能够好好的研读，你对于这个禅修过程、修行的过程，中的种种一些幻境也好了，一些障碍也好啦，或者是一些容易出错的地方。出错的地方都会有进一步的了解，就可以避免这些危险。那当然在这边要再讲的一次，就是今天光依赖我今天的教授、今天的法教是不够的，自己应该再进一步去找相关的书籍。那么这样反复的思维、反复的练习，这样子的学习是很重要的。
那比咱们比下头们，所谓啷个讲来讲，为了这个众生，所谓的这个通了这个地方，行业这个地方的那些生杀动这样当的话，这个等于中高咱们南公共我们把这个从上。生杀动是吧？那个来了我，生杀动有啥个人比这个我大家让这个话，那这个生病那个那些，那些当然的了，那些我的大因的有的，大因的这个操心的，那些的人的，那些的了，啥人的哦，所有的那么些那些的，你这动的那可以。살짝 제가 따라서 나중이라 그래서 만내봐 그 똥똥이니까 똥만 이렇게 먹고 쓴 거요 똥방을 탁탁하게 되니 서로 그래 네가 알아서 똥 싸먹다만 얘기는 뭐 따봐 뭐 따봐 보면 저기 똥하고 그래 똥만 하고 그래 랑지 나지 똥마지 하고 그래서 그거 말이야. 내 가오가 첫째들이 걔네들이 사기를 오면 톡하고 있는데 나한테 같이 똥구나 이걸 못할 때는 맛없나 이걸 나 세고 그래서 이게 나한테 가이 다시 가서 썩은 토야도 토야 내가 야 양대 그래 야 있잖아 넌 말이 딱 한 방에 가라는 나切这个哈佛那地方有的，最哈佛的西大的哈佛什么，大的这么大的讲呢，这个山的这个我们当地的对了，好知道的讲，大一样一个没啦， 그래서 싸움도 싸워하고 집이 싸워 되게 반상으로 이러면 가고 다리가 요거는 매일마다 똑같은 게 되고요. 제가 요를 딱 끼면 대통령 내가 요들은 그래 어떻게 그래서 하면 어떻게 참아야 매일은 보다 보니 어떻게 제가 따와 달아라 파 당들이랑 따와하고 나 내가 잘 나중에 내가 남시 실은 보고 사자도 하고 남시 실은 보고 얘를 똥지 말이야. 아유 나중에 미진스 똥거 그 마성도 같이 똥이 같이 끼는 똥도 그거 말이야. 그래서 내가 미진을 잡히게 이거 잡게 잡히고 나가 엄마가 다리가 내라는 게 때로 참아요. 나도 무슨 하나 내라는 게 들어가 내가 어째 똥제 기사하고 하들 싹똥 내양이 있어 내양이라 딱 이런 내가 죽어요. 내가 나도 좋아 내가 당시 진짜 딱 보면 내가 선풍을 안 쓰려고 했더니 이 죽어도 왔고 선풍은 죽어도 그래서 똥 내양 쌀 똥이는 고아들이 저들하고 이야기를 했지.
And so here the 4 yogas of Mahamudra are taught in the oral instructions by Dharma. And here it is taught that each of those 4 yogas has a 3-fold subdivision called the greater, the middling, and the lesser. The first yoga is called single-pointedness, the stage of single-pointedness. What does that really refer to? In that text it says this first level of single-pointedness, one experiences meditative state of clarity, of abiding within a state of clarity and emptiness single-pointedly, along with an experience of bliss. And the sustaining of that state involves an effort. It says here clarity and emptiness. So that is one thing that is easily said, but then how do we really practice that? What is this nature of clarity? What is clarity? It is the consciousness. In the context of being a sentient being, we call it a consciousness. So a consciousness is the essence of that consciousness currently as a sentient being, is that the consciousness perceives a duality of self and other, and therefore also experiences various feelings, sensations of happiness and suffering. But this clear, empty mind is just this present consciousness that you have. And the clarity is that the consciousness is aware, it sees, it observes, it is conscious of all the so-called outer objects that it perceives in a dualistic manner. So the clarity is this knowing capacity. And then the emptiness is that when you have realized the view of Mahamudra, you realize that there is actually no separation between self and other. There is no more grasping in that state. Grasping has become empty. So there are a lot of teachings given on emptiness, but ultimately what emptiness means now, first on the relative level, is that the entire outer universe and all beings are empty of self-nature. They are compounded phenomenon, and therefore impermanent. So those who have reflected on impermanence can actually understand emptiness better when observing the outer universe. But still, it is very difficult for most of us to really understand the emptiness of oneself, of the self. And due to that, it is still very difficult for us to attain the ultimate state of enlightenment, of Buddhahood. In order to attain the state of Buddhahood, we have to empty the self. And the only way to do that is by cultivating an altruistic mind. So what is this self actually that we perceive? When we really look at it, we can't find it at all. It's really nowhere, but still it arises. It's still sort of there. For example, you say that this object belongs to me, it's mine, or it's my house, or my food, and so on. So this concept, this sense of I constantly arises, just like snowflakes falling down. And this has to be seen with awareness. And then you look into this sense of the self that arises. In the context of Mahamudra practice, you look at it in a direct way. And then you naturally see that there is actually no division between self and other. And to clearly know that, that is this knowing, this clarity aspect of the mind. You know that that the mind itself is empty, that the self is empty. So this clearly knowing is the clarity. And then, now how do you practice this? For example, when you begin to practice and you sit in this room and you meditate with all these people together, so first of all, you don't grasp at anything whatsoever. Neither that people are there or that they're not there. No thought of existence or non-existence. You just stay in an empty, open state. And there's also no doubt about anything in your mind. There's no thought about anything. So you can't say that something is really there, exists, because everything is actually empty. And in the end will turn into ashes, is impermanent. And yet, you can also not say that nothing is there, because on the relative level, karma, cause and effect is still unfailing. So on the ultimate level, when you realize the actual view, you realize that self and other are inseparable, are non-dual. And that is where the consciousness, this dualistic consciousness, transfers or is transferred or becomes primordial wisdom. And that is when you realize Mahamudra. So in terms of emptiness, what needs to become empty is our grasping at a self-other duality. And until that has happened, no matter how much we talk about emptiness, it doesn't really become empty in our experience. Some of you senior disciples might have some experience with meditation, and for example, coming back to meditating here in this room with many people, when you meditate, you might have the experience that when you look around you, you see all these people, and it seems like there is you and all the others. But then when you close your eyes and you meditate, there is an experience of nothing is actually really there. It becomes all empty. And then there still is this clear knowing awareness that knows, it is aware of the empty nature. So here in the text it says clarity and emptiness together with an experience of bliss. So this experience of bliss is that when you rest in that clear empty state, that is very joyful, very blissful. It is because you are not holding on to any thought, any feeling of pleasure or pain and so forth at all. You are resting in the natural state of the mind. And that is very blissful. It is the Dharmakaya, and the nature of Dharmakaya is great bliss. So this point of clarity and emptiness is something that you should reflect upon very carefully.
对不起，刚刚有一个这个藏师的名字讲错，不是拉玛科蒂，是达玛科蒂，蛮有名的达玛科蒂。那么我们讲到这个四部瑜伽的时候呢，它是每一个层次成修的层次呢，每一个层次还有上根、中根、下根这三个小的这个层次。第一个阶段就是 single pointedness， 就是专一的一个成修状态。那就是在这个成修的状态当中呢，我们是一个就是一心一意的专注。那么我们在成修的经验过程当中，是我们安住在一个非常清明的空境。那么专一的境，由这边而生出的一种乐受出来，这个是明空的一个状态。那这种明空的状态讲起来虽然是容易，但是如何修，就是我们要好好练习跟体验的。所谓的一个明是一种意识，我们现在是一个众生，那么我们难免察觉到自他对立、苦乐对立这样子的二元对立的一个状态。那么我们即使了解心空的道理，但是我们还是会去观察到有这种觉知，看到外面的这个差别。那所谓的这个很明或者是很清明的一个状态，是明明白白、明朗的了解。然后我们讲到空性空的部分呢，我们了解自他不二的这个道理，不再去执着它。所以在外面有许许多多对空性的这个讲法，有这种不同的教授。那么从我这个空性的角度来讲，整个外在的气世间都是空的。怎么说呢？因为其实他们现在存在那里，他们是没有自性的。之所以会存在，不过是众缘和，它是无常不长久的，所以说是空性性空。那么这个道理或许对一般人来讲难以理解。那更进一步更难理解就是个人的空性。那么因为这个我们对这个自空难以理解呢，所以就比较难得到证悟到究竟的一个证悟，得到究竟的证悟。我们要得到究竟的证悟，我们首先必须要先了解自己的性空。我是谁？我是什么？我们去哪里找？是无处可寻，因为我们去寻又遍寻不着。常常我们讲我的房子、我的身体、我的这个、我的那个，这都是一个有我的一个概念。我的概念充满了我们整个的生活经验，好像雪花一般降下。那么看到这个我的这个概念升起的时候呢，用大手印的方法，就是直视我们这种我的这种执着跟概念。那在这个直视它的过程当中呢，我们了知事实上没有自他的这种区别，我们能够很清明的见到自他的这个性空，这个就是所谓的明性。那我们实际上我要如何修持呢？在这一边呢，我们这个禅修的时候，尽量不去执着任何的一物，它是一个不纯、非纯、非不纯的一个状态。在这个状态当中，我们没有任何的疑惑。那我们不能讲说它是存在的，因为它是没有自性的，它是终究是无常的，是毕竟是空的。那等到有一天我们真正能够了解自他无二的道理的时候，这种二元对立的执着就转化成一种本殊智。所谓的空性是对于执着自他二元为实的这种执着消失了。 并且能够在了悟这样子的一个道理，能够证到空性。那在讲这空性呢，无论如何在嘴巴上如何讲，在思索上如何思维呢，都不见得能够真正的体验或证到空性。对于一些在场的一些在座的一些老生来讲，你们在禅修的过程当中，常会有这种经验，就是当你眼睛睁开的时候，看到这个房间里面有许许多多的人；当你眼睛闭起来禅修的时候，你没有看到他们了。但虽然你眼睛没有看到他们在这个房间里面，你明明白白的知道他们就在那里。所以在明空之外的一个状态当中，当你安住在这种禅定状态当中的时候，乐境会出现，乐受会出现，这是一种非常大的这种乐，这种愉悦、这种乐的乐受呢，是一种无念的感觉。它并不是说一个很真正的这种快乐这样子，我们一般世俗所讲的这种快乐，而是一种无念的状态。你是安住在心性的本来状态之中，一种法身的状态当中。我们要知道，法身本来就是一种大乐的这个状态。
이제마다 사키 같이 마타 생활당 딱히 또 민가세 용다다 라바나마 담비 사키 같이 잡자와는 마타 생활상은 좋았다는 의미 돌아가세요 라바나마 담 살아나마 담.
So Rinpoche is asking, is there anyone among you who has never received an instruction on Mahamudra? I know if you're someone who has never received an instruction, or someone who never really actually thought about the nature of the mind, or really looked into that, then can you please raise your hand?
在场，请问是不是有人没有听过大手印的这个教授，或者是没有去思维过心性的？如果是这样的，请你们不要客气举手。Don't be bashful. Just if you haven't, just raise your hand.
还是我让对我忙些的时候我第早上他去搞错搞错谁不过去打的呢？刚刚过去那里，你过去我们这上头的过去起码的，这里个的，大家就皮套量，呀，那大家就皮套东西的，这到大家就往里游戏，他到往里这里，是小我，那多没有是就是有没有的，呀，这里呀，那每个节目刚刚，我搞可能那也是，我这几老上到我打到这老了，非常巨大的个光管毛身体了毛了，这个毛讲话这中医搞的毛的是，毛了上层的，这毛大的也是毛的这个了的，这个毛的用的这个毛的用的大些当毛的用的大些当毛的还有一些呢，我但是你是把啥我这个。시바 싸워서 쳤다게 가면 똥 시바 싸워서 가리래 마비 시바인데 나도 장 나고도 어디 나도 망고를 뜨게 싸우다 그래서 나도 장을 봐 저희 너는 레지 이런 심지 시바도 좀 봐버려 나도 심지 시바 하래 심사 심지 시바도 좀 봐버려 이 가리는 가정 치고다 나다고 전이 되게 마지막 시기 시바서 보면 되지 방어라고 정부였어.
So there's just a few who have not received these instructions. So many of you are familiar with it, and so now. If you have never received an instruction on Mahamudra or really reflected on the nature of the mind, and then you receive those instructions, you might feel that I'm not understanding anything at all. And even if you have received instructions, And still there is this very strong habit of thinking that I am real, the I is real, and they, the other people, also are real other beings. And we firmly believe that all of these beings are actual entities who actually exist. And so then even though you have received Mahamudra instructions, that still arises. So even though you have received the instructions, sometimes you meditate Mahamudra, and at that time the mind becomes empty and there's clarity in your mind, and you recognize the empty nature and there are no thoughts in your mind. And then after your meditation, you get up again and go about your daily activities, and then again it comes up. Then again you see that's me and that's him, I'm me and he is him, and so on. And then if he says something harsh to me, then immediately that changes everything, and you look angry. And so that is because you have not realized emptiness, not really understood the nature of the mind. The fault of that is this concept, this belief in an I that exists. You think he said that to me. And once you think that, the I is there, that's a sign of the I. And actually that's how you can recognize the I. So first we have to investigate, does this I really exist or not? And when you look at it, what you find is a clear awareness, a knowing awareness that's there. And when you look at that awareness, it is empty. So what really is this clear awareness? For example, you think, I have so many thoughts, an endless chain of thoughts. So are there many thoughts or one thought? There are limitless thoughts, like there are dust motes in this universe. And yet there is only one clear awareness. And when you experience this yourself, then a very strange feeling arises, and you feel, oh, this is strange. There's really only one awareness. So much arises, but there's really only one awareness. That's the one I have to hold on to, I must sustain. So in the beginning of our practice, we must recognize this concept of I, this existing I. And within that recognition, we find clear awareness.
似乎在场的只有少数人没有听过大手印或心性的这个教授。那么如果说也就是说，大部分的人都熟悉这个大手印的这个教授。如果这些过去没有听过大手印教授的人，或者是没有听过心性的时候，或许你在第一次听到的时候，以为自己不了解任何的一些事情，这些概念都不了解。那么，即使我们过去已经听过大手印教授的这个各位呢，如果你们听到这种的法教的时候，有的时候还是会有强烈的这种感觉，说我是真实的，他人是实有的，一切众生都是实有的。即使你听到了大手印的教授有这样子的直换为实的这种想法还是存在的。那么有的时候我们在进行大手印的禅修的时候，心就可以存在一个明空的一个境界当中。可是禅修之后起坐呢，在日常生活中又升起了执一切外相为实的一个状态。比如说，当人家对我们不好，或者是我们认为别人骂我生气了，那有一个他，有一个我生气了，这都是还没有见到心性的一个状态。 因为我们还有认为一个我的实存，因为他对我讲这种话，他对我做这些事，所以我们在这种情况之下，我们首先要检视的是我是不是真正的实存呢？我们清明的这种，当我们这样子来检视的时候，有的时候会升起清明的这种觉知，那个是我们空明的一种状态。那么，并且能够了解到、了知到自己有许许多不同的这种念头，我们内心的念头就有无量无边，就好像宇宙里面的围城这么样数量的多。可是，在这些念头、这些杂念之外呢，同时还有清明的觉知存在。有的时候我们会升起这样子的念想，就是奇怪，好像什么都没有，只有一个清明的觉知在那里。这一种状态就是我们要保任的，我们要把握的一个状态。因为在这个时候，我的念头已经没有了，而是在上面，在我的念头上去找清明的这个觉知。
So this sense of I arises when a certain condition is present. So when something triggers it, then there is this thought of I. But then how is it when there is no condition that triggers it? Then there is just awareness, clear awareness. Then you should look at this awareness. And if thoughts arise, don't follow them. When thoughts arise, they come and go like waves in water. Only hold on to this awareness. And all the other thoughts of happiness and suffering, of positive and negative thoughts and so on, let them all go. And just sustain clear awareness. And look at this awareness again and again. So that's the only thing that actually remains. And that awareness must attain stability or freedom. That awareness then becomes wisdom. And if you have wisdom awareness, then whatever you do, you will do it well. So this awareness is always there. When you always look at it and remain within it, and sometimes there will be a moment where there is no thought, all thoughts have stopped. And then there is just this awareness and nothing else. And then you really see the clarity aspect, the clarity of that awareness. So the clarity is the clear knowing capacity of that mind. The emptiness aspect is the absence of all thoughts. Then you habituate to this again and again. And when you habituate to this, you will gain an experience of it really is like the sky. My mind really is like the sky. It has no color and no shape and so on. Then when you look at that self, then you really see that you can't say that there is a self, and you can't say that there's nothing there. You can't say it exists because it's nowhere to be found. And yet you can't say that there is nothing because you're engaging in various activities. So then at this point, you don't analyze, you just let it be and sustain a clear mind. So that is the thing to really understand, is to realize. It is that clear mind that knows its own empty nature. And then you gain the experience of it's just you who realizes that. And what about all the others, the other people? So then when you look at others, then the question arises then, his consciousness and my consciousness, are they separate? They're not separate. Only your bodies are separate. So you realize that when you look into that again and again, and then you conclude, certainly his consciousness and my consciousness are exactly the same. And moreover, the consciousness of all beings is the same in essence. And so then when the concept, the perception of a self-other duality disappears, that is when you really accomplish single-pointedness. And that is what you need to hold on to, that is what needs to be sustained. And if you're able to maintain this state well, then you will have an ability to let go, release whatever thought or experience of happiness and suffering and so on, pleasure and pain arises. Awareness will be able to sustain itself with stability. And that is this, the first point on single-pointedness. So here you understand that self and other are non-dual. We have the same mind. So that is the understanding, the experience to be gained on this level.
那有的时候，我们这个我的这个概念、这个念头升起了，那主要是某种因缘，这不同的缘把它合在一起的，合的时候就会升起这样子的一个我的这个念头。那在这个时候，我们还是有一个清明的觉知在背后。当我们有这个清明觉知的时候，我们即使有任何的念头升起，我们不去追随它。这样子就好像海浪一样的那个水波一样，那个任它升任它降，一切的苦乐都放下，只剩我们要做的是保任我们的清明觉知的一个状态。这唯有剩下这个觉知跟明觉，这个 可以让我们得到的自由，也可以让我们得到的这个智慧。当我们有自由跟智慧的时候，无论我们做什么，都可以做得很好。这是一个无念的一个状态，唯有这个觉知存在，这个明，也就是我们的明性，这是明明朗朗、清清楚楚的。这个空性是一种无念的一个状态，我们要反复的这个串习。那么我们的心性真正是像虚空一样，它是无色的，也是无有形状外相的。我们不能说有我，也不能说因为不能说有我，因为没有一个真正存在的东西是我。可是我们也不能说空无一物。我们要去找不到任何的一个东西，所以我们不能说它是实有，我们也不能说它一切都没有，因为我们还是继续的造作种种的一些事业，一些行止。我们有的是非常清朗的这个心，了知这个空性的本质。那么进一步，我们除了来关照自己之外，我们再来关照他人。我们要问的是，他的明觉跟我的明觉是不是分开的？事实上是不分的，唯一分开的是我们的身体。如果他的明觉跟我的明觉是相同的，再拓展到一切众生的明觉，事实上也是相同的。在这个时候，这个境界呢，自他的二元对立消融，只剩下一个专一之境。如果能够安住在这个境况之当中呢，一切的念头都没了。可是我们还是一个觉知，我们要做的是保任这个状态，安住在这个状态当中。在这个状态当中，我们能够了知自他不二的道理，能够了解到一心的这个道理，专注的道理。这个是所谓专注这个瑜伽的一心瑜伽的这个始出的这个境界。
那个12种点样经历了，我比这个东西，你这个可以听得到。呀，那多大不咋的嘛？呀，怕有呢，他放什么这个东西，他这2类，他这个等于是中高啊上去，他的脸看不长的，两点不对，脸不特别开始查上，脸不特别生烧的。你每个身体上对吧？这个，你这看空跟阿拉去，他第二查，他都没有当，他去查到都把查完了拿回来走了，他们这个我就，他们这个马医生，他查完了查完了的，他这让挂的查上的查走了。这你是大概中国的，这5个7万几年，他中国人，这马上把他快了，他这都查了，搞了，他来就别搞了，上去，咱们这个这都他们去来还是说的，我打算那多几万地，查到多万地的，他才就搞的得了。你查到多少长这个乱个来啥样的？5个7万几的，到底查不着，但来啥样的？这有么上面是有么啊？还人不行啊，有么挺下去了？那多人怎么办呢？你把这种的来啥的，这来是证明有的，但就这个网络上我当这个呢，大概查到多少点下一把单。这个我起码是呢，他这个东西可是有啊，芒果可是少了吧，错的，这在当多的话加了个，当然这个胖火龙这个东这个中高啊，这还大这个那帮火龙我说过什么来着？那帮火龙是呢，就这个了3个洞，吃大了过了3个洞，一定那个身体用劲啊。老高的对了，他这这上面的第二种啊，第二就蛮有吧，他抽这里，他抽来 이제 자치고 나보고 자치고 이것이 하고 그때 계시에 다발 시작되고 좀 들동가와들이 따뜻한 유모 동가와들이 유모 짓을 남았다 그래서 오는 거예요. 나도 유모와는 말하는 랑석터들은 뭐 쳐달라지 나도 요래 그런 의미를 요할 때 강의 내 장소에서 제가 좀 되지 내려고 용기를 대시지 다 종류 따면 이제 어디 좋은 거예요. 그냥 이렇게 누구가 제일 잡고 그래서
So this abiding in the state of clarity and emptiness is an experience of bliss. And so when you abide within this state, you gain this experience of this is a very blissful state. And why is it blissful? It is because you are not holding on, clinging to any thought that arises whatsoever. You let them all go, whatever arises, you let it go. If you let it all go, then the natural state, the mind itself, mind in its natural state, is very blissful. And here in the text it says, at this point, this is difficult to sustain. It is difficult to sustain abiding within that state. So we need to train ourselves in that. So first, why is it difficult? Why can we not stay in that state? Why can we not sustain it? Why can we not sustain a state of non-duality? So first it is because we firmly cling to a duality. There is a strong sense of him and me, for example. And then we are attached, one becomes attached to the experience of bliss and wants to avoid suffering or pain. So we perceive enemies and friends. We are attached to our friends and have an aversion against our enemies. And then we develop many subtle forms of attachment and aversion, manifesting as hopes and fears and so on. For example, you think, I want to get that, or you wonder, am I doing all right or not? So these some subtle feelings arise. On the more coarse level, we have attachment and aversion or aggression, and their subtle counterparts are hope and fear. So it is these thoughts of attachment and aversion, hope and fear, it is those thoughts of believing in the reality of what we perceive, and then the labels that we attribute those things that we perceive. All of these concepts disturb the mind. So we need a method to remain undisturbed, first of all. So for that, first of all, when all of these thoughts arise of happiness and suffering and hope and fear and so on, whatever arises, first it is important to reflect on karma, cause and effect, to understand that all the happiness and the suffering that I experience in my life is my own karma. I have created that with my own actions. And so how have I done that? So the Buddha had taught that in this life, whatever we experience is the fruition of our actions that were driven by the emotions of attachment and hatred and so forth, coarse and subtle. So I have engaged in action. I have accumulated karma. First of all, my belief in the true existence of appearances and my labels towards them have caused my mind to become like an ice block. And due to that, many afflictive emotions arose and I accumulated karma. So based on that, you recognize your own afflictive emotions when they arise. It is those afflictive emotions really that have created all of that karma. It is because we cling to the thoughts arising in our mind, subtle and coarse. These thoughts create karma, and karma ripens ultimately. So when you reflect on karma, then you realize that like all the suffering that you experience now is created by that. So your true enemy are your thoughts of attachment and hatred and so on. And your belief in the true existence of appearances and all the labels you give them. All of that has created your suffering now, and it will create more suffering in the future. So your real enemy is that clinging to those thoughts. You should recognize that to be really the ruin that brings yourself and others down. So it says here, difficult to sustain that state. In the context of single-pointedness, also Milarepa had said, first, we need to prevent thoughts from arising. So when you think about that, then that begins with the reflection on karma. And when you reflect on karma, then you also reflect on ultimately your intention of realizing the nature of the mind. So you think about the qualities of that, the qualities of realizing non-duality. And the greater your ability to remain within that non-dual state, the greater will be your happiness. And that kind of happiness is not just a temporary happiness, but it is actually ultimate. So if you're able to let go, purify all these afflictive emotions, then there will be no more ripening of karma. And then that leads to temporary and ultimate happiness. So when you reflect in this way, you will recognize the importance and significance of such a meditation, of preventing the thoughts from arising in the beginning. Then you will feel inspired to sustain mindfulness at all times. So the difficulty to sustain that state comes from following our thoughts and afflictive emotions. So therefore, we first must recognize that if we follow them, that will create suffering. So we have to reflect on karma. If you do not follow these thoughts, if you do not become controlled by these afflictive emotions, if awareness is able if you're able to sustain awareness with stability, then all these thoughts that might arise will dissipate just like waves on water and will become purified in that way. And if you experience suffering, then you recognize that as a purification of your own karma. And if you experience happiness, that is a quality of the nature of your mind. So that reflection is necessary because it will, in the beginning, initially inspire you to practice. You will want to engage in meditation practice.
这个安住在清明双融、凌空双融的这个状态，它的本质就是一种乐，是非常愉悦的。在这个状态当中，我们没有去执着任何的念头，一切都放下，这是一种心性的自然状态当中，它本身就是愉悦的。那么一般人难以保任这种状态当中，难以安住在这个状态当中。我们要问的是，为什么我们难以保任在这个状态之中？我们为什么不能安住在一个无二的这个状态当中呢？往往是因为我们坚持的一种很强的这个执着，他、我的这种概念，我们牢牢的执着他，敌人跟我们。这都是由我们的贪着而生起的，或者是我们对外在的这种排拒而来的。在内在深层一点的，就是我们内在的一种希冀跟恐惧。 我要这个东西吗？我做的还好吗？我一定要这个东西。当这种念头升起的时候，往往就是这样子的一个现象。从粗的面相来讲呢，是一种执着、贪执或者一种排拒的；但从细的面相来讲呢，是我们内在的希冀、希望以及恐惧。我们往往认外相为实为真，让这些念头干扰了我们自己的自心。我们要做的，事实上是安住于不被外界所打扰、所纷扰的这种状态当中。我们要这样做，我们要先去思维因果业力的道理，了解到这一切的经验都是由业力而来的，都是由过去的因而定的。因为我们过去的贪执而造了种种的业，而现在有种种的不同的经验跟体会。当我们相信外相为实的时候，我们的心就会坚固，像冰块一样，继续的累积造业。我们烦恼升起的时候，我们往往随着它而起舞，造了许多的业。这个是有不同的粗细的念头，就这样子升起而造业。将来有一天业果成熟，我们就经验到它的结果了。我们要知道，一切的受苦都是从这边来的，都是因为我们的贪执，因为我们的嗔心而来的。因为我们相信这个外相为实，相信外在的一切标签都是实的，所以这个不但造成我们现在的痛苦，更造成未来的这个痛苦。根源在我们自己执着自他实有，自他对立，所以这个就难以保证，让我们难以保证在一种非常明空清明的一个状态当中。那么我们要做的是尽量不要让我们的念头升起，这个是过去弥勒日巴祖师所讲的。那我们要让自己的念头不升起的时候，我们要先去思维业力的道理。我们如果说能够证悟心性，了解自他不二的这个道理，而安住在这个无二之境的状态当中，自然会有安乐升起。不只是现在暂时的安乐，更有就近的这种安乐。不只是现在暂时的快乐，也有永恒的快乐。如果说能够这样子的禅修的话，免于念头的升起，保持正念，这个是一条很好的道路。那么这个我们凡夫之所以没有办法这样子做，因为我们一直追随的念头而跑，被烦恼所左右，失去了这种稳定的心。当念头升起的时候，我们就随它起舞，就像海上的波浪一样起起伏伏的。可是如果我们能够了解苦，事实上苦的经验，事实上为我们在净化这种业力，那么我们的乐是来自于内心的这个功德的缘故，都是这些因果的。但很清楚的了解这个因果业力的道理，我们就可以开始做禅修了。那在这边补充一点，之前没有听清楚，不是 Lama Kirti， 是 Dharma Kirti。Dharma Kirti 就是我们所谓的法称菩萨。
Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 지금까지 마법만 목표로 살아요. 대부분의 사치모리니 국가 인수노래 근데 대부분 마법세금 땅 주노래 이들 같이 뭐니 영상한 거 지금 영상에도 뭐 오래 준비하면 준비된 정말 그냥 뭐 남아도 되잖아 로스 야대로 계속 가지고 잡으려 이 서킨 대남 쪽으로 해야지.
So there might be many of you who have not received this instructions on Mahamudra and also this book on Mahamudra.
今天有些人没有听过大手印的这个教授，那么也可能有些人没有这个小册子，在外面有那个恒河大手印的册子，已经翻译成中文、英文等等语言了。那如果你没有拿过的呢，你可以拿。那这个呢是一个非常珍贵的法教，有机会的人拿到这个人应该反复的这个读诵。在过去我的上师吉美多杰仁波切，我事实上跟他亲近的时候，他并没有给我太多的法教，他就把呢这个恒河大手印的这个法教给了我，然后指示我反复的读诵。他说，如果你能够反复的读诵这个恒河大手印的话，你的内心自然会感到非常的愉悦。所以大家也可以这样子做，经常的来读诵这个非常重要的这个法教恒河大手印。
If you need this book, please raise your hand.
It's outside already. The booklet is outside in the foyer already. So when you do during lunch break, 没有的人请举手，但那个义工会发。I'm sorry, the volunteers are giving it out. So if you need one, please raise your hand. So volunteer to give you that.
근데 이것을 원래 아니 실제로 내걸 갖고 내가 특별히 이러다가 다 뒤에 집에 나도 되게 나와야 완전히 똑같이 이렇게 나도 이거 같이 라크리 많이 그리고 바이오 선대는 가래 나이 이메라 센서부터가 나이 이메라 그때 시와서 그런 시와고 정보도 안 되잖아 시와 되게 뭐지 가지고 내 유노 말이었어 다 유노 좀 어떻게 이래 노가를 좀 참아더니 이거라도 또 계산하나도 미아와께라서 하던데 그래서 그것도 뭐 하는 유노가 중요한 데한테 그냥 까들이들이 매주 바로 시간 누가 방나 까들이 시간하고 매주 봐야 안에 혹시 남이 람충무슨 거예요. 그래서 이 시간 다시 듣고요. 그래서 아마 유명이 신기하지. 뒤에다가 똥가 와서는 남 공부를 오면 발 이렇게 중앙에서 가지고 참선을 때 양자시 비시에 양자양을 본 그렇게 세비하고 98번만 이게 그래서 그런 답이라 가서 가서 보면 말을 나를 가서 이막 헛받을 비시죠 뭐래 되게 비시도 비하고 이거에 제일 이걸 강하지 따뜻하고 왕은 왕이잖아요 깨는지 제대로 우리가 저걸 해서 강이 깨는지 플라스 비서고요 나는 나한테 마시고 가기는 깨는지 비서고요 그리고 엄마가 비서고요 왕들이 왕하고 깨는지 제대로 필요하요 해서 제대로 나도 왕께는 왕 제대로 생겨 왔고요 해서 그래요 우리는 따라치는 못하잖아 나도 사 기능을 다 똑같잖아 그래서 나는 부족하다
So it's difficult to abide single-pointedly. And the reason why we are not abiding single-pointedly is because there is this sense of an I. From this sense of an I, the thoughts and afflictive emotions arise, and then we cannot overcome them. So for that we need mindfulness, conscientiousness, a clear mind that sees that there is no duality between self and other. So this clear awareness, resting in this non-dual state, has to be sustained. And so that's the quality of clear awareness. So when afflictive emotions arise, various afflictive emotions arise, and when they arise, we have to bring to mind the fault of those afflictions. For example, when ignorance arises, ignorance leads to birth as an animal, and the animal realm is the natural manifestation of ignorance. Or hell is the natural manifestation of hatred, and so forth. The Samantabhadra prayer explains the fault of each of the afflictive emotions. So if you bring this to mind again and again, then when an emotion arises, for example, you get very angry, then immediately you will be able to remember the fault of the anger, and you will not focus on the other person who is making you angry, but you will just recognize there is anger. So if you habituate to that, then the moment it arises, you will be able to see it. And if you clearly see it, you will also be able to let it go. And this is really how we actually transform the afflictive emotions into wisdom according to the secret mantra. So it is difficult to sustain that state of single-pointedness. So here on the level of the first level of single-pointedness, which is the lesser single-pointedness, here when you accomplish that level, then whenever you are actually in meditation, whenever you meditate, you're able to abide single-pointedly. So whenever you come to meditation, you again bring up mindfulness and you stay in single-pointed state. You habituate to it again and again in whatever you do. Before you go to sleep, you fall asleep with mindfulness. In your daily activities, when you're eating, you eat with mindfulness. Milarepa had also taught that. Before you go to sleep, you should sustain mindfulness and so on. So first, it is very difficult to remember that, to always be mindful. And so what is the antidote to that? When you receive the 4 empowerments, the first empowerment, the base empowerment, is related to that first stage here, the stage of single-pointedness. And specifically, the generation stage, the development stage, is related to single-pointedness. And that is because when you visualize the deity, for example, if you always think of Theresic, then you're not distracted, or you're always thinking about the syllable hung, for example. So the visualization, focusing your mind on the visualization or the hung and so on, is related to the practice of single-pointedness or the base empowerment. So for as long as we are unable to sustain the actual view, we have to remember the deity and bring the deity to mind. For example, personally, I always bring Tara to mind. Whenever I encounter difficulties, instantly I'm able to remember Tara. So this is how the single-pointedness, the stage of single-pointedness, is related to the generation stage or the base empowerment.
一般人要能够一心专注是不容易的，为什么呢？因为有 因为有了我，所以烦恼就升起而不能克服。那有没有什么对治的方法呢？就是我们的正念，我们的精进，让我们的我们的心安住在一个没有自他二元对立的状态当中。那要好好的保任在这种清明的状态当中。当烦恼升起的时候呢，我们要去观它的过患。比如说，无明对应的是畜生道，嗔心对应的是地狱道。在不兴王如来祈愿文里面讲到每一种烦恼以及它对应的牲畜。所以，当一个情境发生而让我们这个动气生气的时候，我们要去了认这个嗔心，而不是去注意这个对方那个人。我们要做的是放下。那这个是密咒圣对给我们的一个教授。那重要的是要维持我们的专一的这个状态。那么，一开始的时候可能这个程度比较少一点。那么或许在这个禅修的这个禅坐的当中呢，比较容易可以一心专注。但是禅修的过程当中，我们还是要反复的来练习我们的长养我们的正念以及专注。我们要去反复的思维，把这个放在我们的心上，甚至在睡前都要保持正念，吃饭的时候也要保持正念觉知。弥勒日巴祖师过去也这样讲，提醒我们在睡觉前也要保持正念。这个是不容易的，对一般人来讲不容易的，但是还是要这样子努力的去做。我们之前讲到的四级灌顶呢，第一灌是平灌，那平灌对应的这个大手印是瑜伽的是专注，也是平常的修法本尊法的升起次第，有这样子的对应关系。当我们在观想本尊的时候，我们专一不分心，甚至专注在一个种子智吽上面。那么这是我们在观修升起次第要注意的，要一心专注的来做这样子的观想，要这样子来意念本尊。就我个人而言呢，我这一辈子呢，主要的观想的本尊是度母，那我常常能够意念度母。所以这个跟一心跟专一这个阶段呢，相对应的是平灌。
这个사자 제보라 남들 제대로나 남들 이제는 사자 제보 당고 뉴 드린 동고 드린 매도 그리고 얘는 지를 받겠어요. 사자 제보 그런 똑같은 게 있었는데 뭐다 사자 제보 그거랑 저 사자 제보 가려라 그래야 되네. 그래서 샘지 받는 것도 나오는 봐. 너무 중동력을 주거든 좋아서 뭐지 뭐 일자가 가시나 동료를 하시자 하이 사제수 나 통세됐어요 일랑을 하시자 그래도 동료를 주고 얘들 동료들 공부도 담대를 뭐때 와서 나도 먼저 담을 다다 맞춰리지 뭐 나가 자주 못지 이제 사제지 뭐 하고는 사제지 뭐 광을 안 끼더니 샘 나가다 그래 이내로 하고 왔으면 됐다 다주님으로 하고 서지 샘도 동반이래야지 살아주는 동반이래야지 야 지고들 샘도 남과 침해가래야지 오 자치족지기는 나서 거기에 담주랑 샘을 쇼부를 샘도 뭐는 쇼부가 나도 샘을 강조하는데 오면 쇼부를 제 가야라도 써고 말이야 르드 말이야 샘을 다 잡을 사람들은 샘 찾대 왜냐 로지 뛰어가서 오메라 로 잡을을 내가지 로시가 먹었었대요. 그걸 말라. 대대지 쇠도 사와는 똥관이 자치고 쇠도 하여간 자치고 그래야지. 이 자치고 뭐지 내가 가래. 이 기름 보여줘 동네 가래 동네는 말하면 따로마다 동네지 쇠코는 뛰어가서 쏴 내가 하고는 돌이 장을 살려주고 동포라. 이 생각 속에 이자 송다고 되는 생각 봐서 차는 거요. 데이터를 사자 치고 这当这的这这动物质啊，这没多了，这人这个的我没搞上，只能把这的东西下过过的，
So those 4 yogas of Mahamudra are levels that of increasing realization, of growing realization, which is just like the growing of a sprout into a fruit. So first you have a sprout, and then you have a stalk, then you have a flower, and then you have a fruit. So the term Mahamudra, why do we actually call it that? What does it mean? First, there is a concept of I in our mind. So we have the sense of me. And when that is present, then even the slightest difficulty leads to an overwhelming, unbearable feeling of suffering. Some people even commit suicide, or they kill other people, or whoever comes their way. They are completely tied up by their own misery. They are tied up by their self, by that I. And they have no awareness of that. They consider the I as most important, and they act accordingly. If you understand the meaning of Mahamudra, you see that the mind is by nature like space. When you understand the nature of the mind, first what you understand is that there is no duality between self and other. The mind is empty and it is clear. The mind is empty like space. It is extremely vast. In Mahamudra and doctrine both, it is said that everything, appearance, existence, samsara, and nirvana, everything is encompassed by the mind. So everything fits in the mind. So that is something that might be difficult to comprehend. One might wonder, how can everything and everyone fit into it? How can everyone be in it? It is not the body, but it is the mind. The mind pervades the entire world. For example, in this world, we have light or electricity. There's only one light, really. But this one light engages or accomplishes all kinds of purposes, activities in this world. Everything is powered by this light. So just look at the nature of light, for example. And that is just like the mind, the clarity. The mind is clear, and that clear awareness is empty. And that emptiness means the mind is vast, endless, extremely vast. And it transcends birth and death, and it is unchanging. And to the mind, all suffering really, all change and suffering and so on, whatever arises is just like a dream. In reality, the mind is never born and it never dies. And that nature is also referred to as Vajradhara, when one really has realized the meaning of Mahamudra. Then the mind becomes like space and the body like a rainbow. So this is really what happens when you realize Mahamudra. And so then how the 4 yogas correspond to the growing of a fruit. The stage of one-pointedness or single-pointedness is the sprout. Second stage, the unelaborated stage, the second yoga, that is the flower stalk. Then the third, equal taste, is the flower. And fourth, the stage of non-meditation is the fruit. So we should understand it as a gradual growing, just like from a sprout into a fruit.
在大使手印式瑜伽里面，它这个4个层次是逐渐得到的一种这个证悟的这个境界。 从种子到发芽，到花茎，到果实等等。那么我们讲的大手印，为什么叫做大手印呢？我们事实上这样解释的时候，我们这个要去的是我这个执着的个概念。如果遇到我们这个我的概念的时候，即使遇到一个很小的困难，都造成你很多的烦恼。那么我们因为有我的关系，都被束缚得很紧，造成许许多多的痛苦的情况。因为一般凡夫认为我是最重要的。可是如果说我们了解大手印的话，我们知道心是像虚空一样，在这个心性的本质当中是没有自他二元的对立的，心空而清明，空是大如虚空的。我们这外界的显象，一切的显象都是为自心，一切显现为自心，这个也是大圆满的这个境界。那么或许有人会问说，这个世界上这么多人，我们如何能够把所有的人都放在那里呢？这不是放的不是这些众生，这么多人的身体，而是心。我们就像这个世界上有光一样，它的本质是一样，可是它外在的显象是不一样，它成就的不同的这个目的。所以我们要去看，不是看光的这个外相，或者是看电的外相，要去看它的本质。如果能够这样子的话，我们了解它有清明的这个本质。它本质是空的，广大无边、无垠、无际的。那么，我们心，如果说对遇到许许多多的改变的时候，会升起一种苦受的这种感觉。可是在这个时候，我们要把这些苦受，这些都看成梦境一般。事实上，当我们往内去观心的时候，我们的心性是在一种未生的状态当中，从来不生，也以后也不会灭的。它的本质就是我们所谓的金刚种持。在我们证悟大手印的境界之后，就是这样子的一个境界。在这个情况呢，我们的身体就像虚空一样，我们的身体就像彩虹一般。所以在大手印的4层的瑜伽，我们在第一层次的一心或专注呢，它就像一个花朵的这个芽，发芽的那个芽一样。到第2个层次离系瑜伽呢，就是像花茎一样，花的一个茎干。第3个层次一味瑜伽呢，就是所谓的花。到最后的无修瑜伽就是果。所以在这个4个层次呢，是逐渐生长，逐渐证悟的。
这个大你那这些那这些那样，你就人话的上面讲了，这样的我做了，这是上好怎么我做的，这话什么，这话把不能讲的，光顾了的，这个特别用过的还是呢，你用这个大看的这样子，他的查清楚东西我不拿我看的，你这是问题，俺的还清楚的。看上了人有的是，人际发展就叫完你有的是，这里是人际发展这个罗马国刚一讲的把这个光过的是，就叫完这大伙的就还好了我来说，出差经历人际发展就叫完你看上是就可以的，这个你第一是问的，人际发展就叫完你有嘛的是，人际发展是，我说咱这叫完的人嘛还好这个的，这样慢慢的那个，你老当时马上的粮食那是第挂的块儿，这咋整？就挂着那个还好多人际发展那个，他们就讲好好的，这样慢慢搞的没了，这个新的搞出我们来是，一定是我这个看看或者是我的导致的，就他把人把你。他们人际发展在上面的，这可能挺多的，因为这个你这个还是给老三可以的，我们 뭐 조금 넣어서 그냥 하나 양보용이 대리 대라 뒤에 잠깐 나서도 내가 가르쳐 버리거든요. 삭히는 독신이 와서 꼭 갖고 있어 버려. 뭐 뒤에 고와 뭐 동갈 난지에 되거든요. 사기의 승기 당기 사기에 대해서 지금 정말 사기에 혼자 로버트 베더니 다 승기 사기에 비해 가야지. 승기 무슨 자동이 있어. 사기가 약속이 있어. 자동이 약속이 끼리 자동 처리 사기가 가야지. 자동 가야지 끼나 가야지 자동 사도 다들 차려. 뭐하는 무슨 남이 소리만 해. 말이 나한테도 우리도 나한테랑 이걸 내도 거예요. 철딱지도 사진 쓰고 보면 다 나비로 하고 하고는 양사양수 레벨 제일 기준이 요모 같은 거다 내서 다 철딱한 거예요. 이걸 보고 주치제 대고나 그래야 보여요. 나한테 자기 좋긴 가르치나 이 참아마디 같이 배자 대만 걸로 거예요. 원하시 그래요. 사기 좋긴 원하 쓴디 나한테 생각 내로 대라시 그래요. 멋지게 해서 따요.这到大国也艺术你生活能有那去，能当差有那去，但你有那哪块能有能当上，能到这哇到我们这哇去，弄个把戏那里，这差不多了，这是那个多把车装你弄得多，这是那个是给就把车的大车的力气给了这个人过来。
So, but now we're speaking about those 4 yogas, all of them. But then still, when we think about it now from a more long-term perspective, if one this is something that has to be trained and habituated throughout many lifetimes. You have to practice over the course of many lifetimes. And after a long time of practice, finally some results will come. So why does it take so long? Now when we are introduced to Mahamudra and Dzogchen, and now what follows is actually an extremely important point that you should remember. So it is generally taught that there is 2 kinds of individuals. There are those who realize gradually, and there are those who realize instantaneously. So those who realize gradually have to train hard with effort for a very long time, for many years and so on, gradually. And then there's those who realize instantaneously. If you tell them something now, then now they understand it. So in the other lineages, this is how it is explained, that there are these 2 kinds of individuals. However, Lord Jigten Sungön actually says that there are no 2 kinds of individuals. Everyone trains in a gradual way. Everyone is a gradual realizer. There are no instantaneous realizers. So then you might wonder, how come then that some instantaneously understand, immediately understand? It is because in a previous life, if you have not broken your samayas with guru and disciples and so on, and if you have engaged in practice, then you bring this continuum, this imprint with you into this life, and as a result of that, in this life, you will understand immediately upon being introduced. But that doesn't mean that you have not done anything in a previous life. If you have not trained or practiced in anything in previous lives, then right now you won't be able to understand anything instantly. So that is a very unique, very special instruction by Jigten Sungön, saying that there are no 2 individuals. Everyone realizes in a gradual way. That is actually has a very deep meaning, And it's really the truth, actually. Even though there are some who instantly understand something, it is because they have trained in previous lives, really. They already have done the gradual training. And the reason why some do not understand right away is because in previous lives they have not engaged in such training. That is why now they have to make an effort. So we now actually have to make an effort. So people sometimes think that it is very hard to understand, really understand Mahamudra and Dzogchen, for example. And that is the reason. It is because of having a strong habit of grasping at a self. So the Buddha actually said all beings are actually Buddhas. He said you all are Buddhas, but you are obscured by adventitious stains. So it seems that there are real sentient beings, there are beings, and they are like ice blocks. And the Buddhas are like ocean water. But actually they are one essentially. The Buddha said essentially ice is water. So what happened? How did water freeze into ice? It is because of this grasping at a self. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says, all suffering without exception comes from wishing for one's own happiness. Because of having habituated to that, that sense of the self always naturally arises, automatically arises. And if you look into that, and if you meditate and practice Mahamudra, you will gradually understand that there is actually no self. And then when you're out of meditation, again it arises. The self arises again, and from that afflictive emotions arise, and then again we act out on them, and again we accumulate karma. And that is how our mind becomes repeatedly obscured. And that is the reason why it takes such a long time to practice in order to gain a fruition. So that is a very good thing for us to understand. And when we speak about Mahamudra or Dzogchen, many read a lot of books about that, or there are the instructions on the middle way, the Madhyamaka. So we have those stream, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and Madhyamaka. They really all teach us the nature of the mind. They speak about the nature of the mind. It is just like one person having three names. And also Jigten Dzongchen has said, actually, we cannot label the mind with a name. We cannot really call it anything. It is like space. You cannot give space a name. There is no self and other. So in the Madhyamaka, the middle way, the body of logical reasoning and so on, the scripture authorities, they here, for example, it says that it cannot be labeled. It is void of any name. And if we understand that, then gradually our doubts about the nature of the mind will get lesser. And our trust, our belief that we can attain such a state of single-pointedness and so forth will increase. So that is why it is good to understand this point.
我们讲的这个大手印式瑜伽，从长久的角度而言呢，是要慢慢的修行的。比如说，如果你之前没有修的话，从这一生开始修止、修观，这样从这边开始，在这个过程，透过多生的修习以及长时间的修炼之后，才会慢慢有一些结果出来。不管是大手印也好，大圆满也好，对这一点的理解是很重要的。一般在很多不同的法教传承来讲，有所谓的渐修跟顿悟这样子的分别。所谓的渐修，一般人认为是努力的训练、长时间的修持；而对于顿悟呢，就是某些人呢，他是一听就懂的。那在其他的传承有这样子的一个分别。但是对吉田松公祖师来讲说，事实上没有渐修跟顿悟这两种分别的，每一个人都是透过渐修一步一步的训练，那么而来的。那或许有些人讲说，那为什么这些人他一听就能够马上懂呢？ 吉田松公主师就讲说，这是因为他们前世这个没有毁坏三昧耶跟上师之间的三昧耶，而且精进的修法，把他这个修法的这个修学的这种修习修学的这种印记带到这一辈子来，所以在这个时候因缘成熟，他一听就懂了，并不是说这些人前辈子什么都没有修，就一听就能够懂的。那么如果真的是一个人前辈子都没有接触佛法，没有修的话，到这一辈子听的也听不懂，听的法没有办法立刻能懂。所以吉田松公主是这样讲说，这个无二的这种讲法呢，是非常深远而真实的这种含义的。如果说我们前世没有听闻这个法的话，我们不可能在这一世一听就懂的。那么一听就懂的人，主要是来自于他们前世已经有努力的这样修持，那么然后慢慢的去掉我执。至于对于一般凡夫来讲，听的没有办法懂或不能接受，主要都是来自于我执太强的原因。那么佛陀过去曾讲说，众生本为佛，只为客成遮。因为我们的种种烦恼执着呢，让我们的心凝固成冰。可是你可能会问说，为什么水会变成冰呢？那主要就是来自我执很强，而且执我为实的结果。在《佛子行37颂》里面讲到，诸苦源于欲自乐，所以主要就是当我们把这个执着自己，还有执着自己的安乐的时候，这样就是苦的来源了。所以我们如果能够禅修大手印的时候，会到达一种无我的一个境界。如果说一般人在禅修有了一个我的这个概念，你因为我而随着我而升起的一些妄念，造成了一种烦恼，而加上我们自己随着它去造作一些行业的话，这就是造业的开始，我们的心就变得越来越迷惘了。所以在这个过程当中，我们必须要长期的来修学，要了解到大手印也好，大圆满也好，这个都是要这边我们要好好的记住了。甚至大中观讲的也是一样，大手印、大圆满、大中观讲的是我们的心性，就好像一个人有3个名字一样。那么吉田松公主师过去也讲说，不能用名相来把我们的为我们的心来贴个标签，因为事实上是没有自他的这个分别的。中观是从因明的角度开始的，他们也认为说，对一切事物不能够加以名相。如果说我们对这一点能够了解的话，那么我们对心性的这种移情就会慢慢减少。透过专一的禅修这个训练，可以慢慢的加强这样子的情况。
这上面过了他去看的训练哦，上清早去看的早进训练哦，他不干不了嘛，我就他都这个地方这里这样先他在南部南京搞这样的这高手他都干这样的他让身子长了，你就把他这个搞了电上面干去给他配的里面。他这个介绍这个看说介绍嘛，你对呀这些用嘛，搞看多了他每样的同性多了能做起呀，我这个知道的生活工作嘛，生活知道的，他生活高头这种我这个差别了这南方最错的对吧？里面说做吃我的南生活里面说这到了我们的呢，他让或者长期去了大街上的车马看到车马去到我们他们这些人这么大地方跑了，但是你的没地了跑，没地身体了跑，身体的打开了这样嘛，身体大一部分地呢，没办法呢，有办法了，身体往哪到茶样我没办法了，或者长期身体生活的，还有人出来了嘛。身体就当那生活上包括的生活的话，或者还好了，因为第一个人让个没第 Didi 좀 세대 저거를 하고 그래. Didi 마저까지 같이 저거를 잡아서 좀 저거 때문에 이 하고 이거는 아 오늘 직장은 뒤지고 봐야면 집에 봐야면 정상장 내려오래. 뒤에서 나한테 뒤에서 하고 그러지. 그리고 그러면 다른 양천이 자지 너도 조금 딱 하기는 도와서 그러고 그냥 그러고 그거 좀 쭉쭉 가야 돼. 저기 상태를 보자 하고 막 공부도 나한테 대해서는 다다 같이 요나니까 그냥 미개나니까 같이 공부자들이 계속 친구를 해서
So if you understand all of this now, then also later you will understand the meaning of whatever instruction you receive, be it Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and so forth. Then you will know that they all are many different methods to realize the nature of the mind. But ultimately, we come to the same place, that is to realize the mind. And also now there are methods to liberate the thoughts in our mind. So ultimately, the point is to realize the nature of the mind, to purify all grasping in the mind. So if you understand that all of the different methods have that same purpose, then receiving any instruction becomes very beneficial. Otherwise, if we do not understand that, then we will think that all of these different teachings and so forth are all different things, separate from each other. And then it will also be hard to accomplish even single-pointedness. So we need to understand that there is actually no separation. They are just different terms, all leading to the same thing, to realize the nature of the mind. For example, in Dzogchen, it is said that all phenomena of samsara and nirvana are encompassed by the mind. There is nothing that is not encompassed by it. The mind is like space, pervading all of samsara and nirvana. And therefore, it is said Dzogchen is the supreme path. In Madhyamaka, in the middle way, for example, it says, when you analyze phenomena of samsara and nirvana, do you find anything that is valid? Is there anything valid there? So you will not find anything whatsoever, because everything, all those phenomena are compounded and impermanent. And then you analyze the person, and you understand what the person is. And then you look at the mind of that person. What really is that? And then you realize that when you grasp at the idea that there is something existing, that is mistaken. But also grasping at the idea that nothing exists, there's nothing, that's also mistaken. If you think that there is something that exists, then there's nothing. The mind is like space, it is empty. And if you think there is nothing, then still there is the mind that creates samsara and nirvana. So both kinds of grasping, existence or non-existence, are confusion. So when you meditate according to the Madhyamaka now, you think of nothing whatsoever, not existence, not non-existence, and you just rest in the space-like nature of the mind that is clear and empty. And such a person then will perceive all of the appearances like an illusion, like an illusory plane. And without grasping at their reality, they can engage in activity. So it is called middle way then because one remains very straight in a sense, without bending to the existence or non-existent side. So without grasping at anything, the mind remains very straight. That is the middle way, or the Madhyamaka. So when you understand that, all of that, then you see that all of these practices come back to one single essential point. When you see that, then you can walk on that single way. And actually, the one single way to go, to walk on, really is to develop loving kindness. The real reason why we have not understood the nature of mind and why we still have not developed loving kindness is because of grasping at the self. So whether you receive an instruction or a teaching or you practice on your own, the one path to traverse, to walk on, is just actually that, is to cultivate loving kindness, is to eliminate self-grasping.
如果我们现在能够了解到这些道理的话，以后就更能够了解大手印的这个教授，那么或者是大圆满的教授。那么大圆满帮助我们去了解心性，一切是从心而来了。那么有了这些解脱我心的这种方法，事实上这个是一种，我们如果说对了解到，不管是说你的传承是什么，这个大手印大圆满，这些法教根本上是没有分别的，那没有什么不同的。那这样子的理解呢，是对我们接受这些法教是有利的。那么要不然的话，我们如果执着这些是一个一个都是不同的法教的话，就对我们没有太大的帮助，因为我们所看的都是分离的，那么听了这么多也难以吸收。那么因为这个他们不过是用不同的角度、不同的名相来讲同样一个东西，就是我们的心性罢了。从大圆满的角度来讲，一切轮回涅槃都是由心而造的。心本质是广大如虚空的，它是超越轮回跟涅槃的。以大圆满的角度来讲，大圆满是无上之法。从大中观的角度来讲呢，他们是分析轮回跟涅槃，什么是真正的存在的正确的呢？当我们这样子去思辨的时候，无法可得，无依可得，了解到一切无常，不过一切显象不过是众缘和合暂时假立的一个状态罢了。那么当我们再去分析一个人的时候，我们会去问自己，是什么东西真的有一个人在那里吗？那么如果当我们去执着一切的外相是实有的话，这是一种错误。那么可是当我们又如果是跑到另外一边去了，就讲说一切空无一物，这也是错误的。所以当我们讲一切实有的话，事实上没有一个东西是实有的，不过是众缘和合。但是我们讲是空无一物，就像这种玩空的讲法的话，又不对了，因为我们的心可以造出轮回跟涅槃。所以总之这种二元对立的这种执着是造成人心的迷惘的，它是一种非纯非不纯的一个状态。那么我们就要做的就是安住在如空的心性当中，了解到一切的形象是如幻的，不去执着它为实，而同时又能够造作一切。这个是中道来讲的话，它是以这个就是采取中道的做法，它是一个很直不弯曲的一种做法。心是很直的，这是一种中观的概念。那么这些不同的对于心性的修行呢，都是回到同一点，唯一的道路是什么呢？就是长养人的慈爱心。我们之未能够证悟心性呢，未能够长，主要是来自我们没有办法长养我们的慈爱心，因为我们自己的我执还很强的原因。所以呢，透过慈爱心的长养，能够慢慢去掉我执，超越这一切。
Dharma jadi cuma kapsalnya, jadi cuma di satu kali gomna, oh so dia coba tu mana pun coba tu, dia tu makan itu, tak jadi cuma ini, itu tak jadi.
So this completes the lesser, the lowest stage, the first stage of single-pointedness. And when you have accomplished that stage, then you feel that when I meditate, then I'm able to remain in a state of clarity. I'm able to liberate thoughts. But when I'm not meditating, then I'm not able to do that. So when you're meditating, you're able to do that. So that is the lesser stage of single-pointedness.
那么我们到这边已经算是讲完了这个一心瑜伽的这个第一个阶段，也就是我们在禅修的阶段当中呢，我们心可以安住在清明无念的状态当中。可是当我们出定的时候呢，我们就没有办法安住在这种清明无念的状态之中。所以这个是专一瑜伽的第一个阶段，第一个层次。
这如果改掉的有这些，与马光讲等于是这样多些，我们是第我这人马光的车子里，你每个人常常就把这个拍的留的，而且那个就刚一就拍了干的，这样是不是？要么就要出去过，要么就当然出去过，也来说是错的这里。你光是让你聊呢，打理一会儿也是，这挺重要的也是，
Then next is the middling single-pointedness, and in the text it says, at times, even when you're not meditating, you go into this state of samadhi, and the state of stable meditation that occurs. So that is the middling single-pointedness. And so that is, sometimes when you're not actually meditating, meditation arises. For example, at times when you encounter difficulties, or at times when you experience a very powerful bliss, then a very strong feeling arises, then sometimes naturally meditation arises. And when that arises, that is excellent. And that is a sign of accomplishing the middling single-pointedness.
那么在专一瑜伽的第二个阶段，就是不管是我们在禅修的阶段，能够安住在三摩地，然后出了禅定之后呢，也能够稳固的升起在这个三摩地的状态之中，等于是无修而修。那么在我们生活当中呢，有的时候在很巨大的困难发生的时候，或者是说我们很强烈的那个乐升起的时候，我们能够安住在禅修的状态之中，这个是很好的。那这样就是专注瑜伽、一心瑜伽的第二个阶段的成就。
这看起来觉得爬有爬的那个，爬出去有这个，爬上去用过的，爬有的用了，搞这里边呢，用过那个出去过街呢，用过的两头这下个街过的边了，我记得那个就是现在人家的小伢来回来，这个都搞的，让他的下的出的用过的，把出东出过的，到了平时的那这个大的，马光讲的平时就是那个这种用过的，这那个炒就是很好的，出就跟用在新疆的那个，从这。
So that is also related to a continuous state of conscientiousness. So here we have developed a more stable state of mindfulness. And that this conscientiousness or mindfulness comes really from loving kindness. So that is at a time when you're mindful and a strong thought arises or afflictive emotion arises, then together with that also wisdom, awareness arises, is also present. So that means that when you get angry, for example, you immediately know, oh, I'm being angry. So together with the anger, there is also awareness. And then the power of this awareness, the awareness then has the power to weaken the afflictive emotion, to release it. So that is a sign of having, again, some stability in mindfulness. So therefore, even at times when you're not actually meditating, mindfulness arises. And at that point still it is somewhat difficult to overcome the more subtle thoughts, but you're able to let go of those more powerful ones, the thoughts and the afflictive emotions as they arise together with a mind of wisdom.
那我们能够持续的用心的这个安住在这个正念的这个状态当中，能够你长养出比较稳固的这个正念，那这些都来自于我们自己的慈爱心的这个培养。那么在这种这些情况之下呢，我们自己观照的力量，我们的觉知就比较强了，智慧能够升起。所以有的时候，即使我们动了嗔念了，我们知道除了嗔心之外，还有一个觉知能够来存在。那么这样子还是有一些智慧的，能够了认出来，哦，这就是自己在动心，自己是嗔心，能够放下，这个就是有正念的一种征兆。那么即使不是在禅修的那个时间里面，能够保持我们自己的正念。那么有的时候，在这个阶段，一些比较维系的一些念头或者是一些烦恼，还是没有办法放下。但是因为我们有正念的关系呢，智慧就慢慢增长了。